Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Welcome to another edition of Truth and Liberty. I'm your host, sitting in for Richard Harris today. Bishop E.W. Jackson, it's my pleasure to be with you. And before we do anything else, I want to thank all of you for your prayers, for your support, for your contributions to Truth and Liberty, to Andrew Womack Ministries, to the whole effort that we have to help call America to her truest self, to call indeed the world to what God would have us be. And thank God for the leadership of Andrew Womack and Jamie Womack and the entire team at Andrew Womack Ministries and the entire team here at Truth and Liberty. Richard Harris, your normal host, it's my honor to sit in for him. Well, I've got a very special program for you today because I'm sure you all know that a few days ago, we, meaning the United States of America, took major action in Venezuela. And I want to talk about that from a biblical point of view, but also talk about it from a logistical and intelligence perspective. And I've got a guest on who will be joining us shortly to help us do that. But first, I want to mention to everybody that we do have a free gift, a free offering that we want everybody to be able to take advantage of. It's an introduction to how to stay positive in a negative world. And boy, it couldn't be more relevant, could it? How to stay positive in a negative world. It's one of the booklets that Andrew wrote. And you can obtain this, by the way, as the ministry's free gift. All you got to do is follow the information that is provided for you on screen, and we'll be happy to send that to you. Well, folks, we're living in very, very serious times, aren't we? Oh, and by the way, if you need prayer or you want to find out more, you can either go, of course, to Truth and Liberty. Again, the information provided on the screen. You can also call if you need prayer at 719-635-1111. Never want to leave that out because we all need prayer. We all need God's help, don't we? Well, a few days ago, our country took major action to bring to heel the dictator of Venezuela, who, following the footsteps of Hugo Chavez, has essentially ruined that country. But in addition to that, of course, he's been engaged in some very, very dangerous and, of course, unlawful activity that has affected our country. I mean, he was indicted 5 years ago, folks, 5 years ago, indicted in United States federal courts on a number of different charges having to do with terrorism and drug trafficking and trafficking in weapons, all kinds of things. Not to mention that he's been doing some things with supplying oil to Iran, which we have an embargo against that right now, and he's been violating that embargo. And just basically a bad actor on the scene. Well, President Trump took action, and he's been arrested now. At the time you're hearing this, I'm not sure where the legal process will be, but of course, he is headed for trial in an American court of law. And if found guilty of the charges alleged against him, he will probably spend the rest of his time in a federal prison. But he is out of power now in Venezuela. President Trump has said that the team of people that he has around him, his cabinet, will now be overseeing Venezuela as they transition to new leadership. And one would hope to some sort of democratic system that allows them to choose the leader that they want, as opposed to having a dictator like Maduro who just basically disregards elections and stays in power at the point of a gun. So before we bring our guest on, I wanted to ask you all to think about this from a biblical point of view, because that's the first question that I always ask. A lot of people are protesting, they're all upset and they're worked up, and, this is American imperialism, it's the same old leftist nonsense that you hear all the time. The question for us as Christians is this the right thing to do? Is this proper? Is this something that God is pleased with, something that God would have a president of the United States do? And I'll tell you, for me, the answer is very simple. It's to be found in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, which says the following: "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." One of my criticisms of American politics, and this happens on both Republican and Democrat sides, is that our politicians are often obsessed with their own interests, not the interests of the people of the United States of America. At times, it seems they could care less what happens to us. They could care less about our safety. They could care less about our security. They could care less what happens to the average American, as long as they stay in power, as long as they can, I guess, do their little stock trades and just enjoy the good life, constantly accusing President Trump of being a king. But frankly, there are a lot of politicians who think of themselves as kings and queens and princes and princesses and act that way with our money. And yet, when it comes to actually defending the interests of the United States of America, very little interest, very little action. That's a violation of this principle. The principle is that American leaders are supposed to be, I'm talking about political leaders now, are supposed to be, first and foremost, looking out for the interests of the American people. Maduro's is at least in part responsible for the deaths of up to 100,000 Americans who've been killed by fentanyl. He is responsible for helping to facilitate human trafficking. He intentionally sent gang members and prisoners, violent, convicted felons into our country. Tren de Aragua. He facilitated their coming here, terrorizing America, terrorizing our people, taking over apartment buildings and neighborhoods and so forth. He's just a bad actor, and he's been acting against the interests of the United States of America. And the president has reinvoked the Monroe Doctrine and basically said, in our hemisphere, you will not do things that are counter to the interests of the American people and the United States of America with no response. We will respond. We will act. So in my view, the president is on strong biblical grounds to do this. Now, the second question I'll ask is, well, now that sounds good, right? Question is he on strong legal and constitutional grounds? In my view, as commander-in-chief, the president has an absolute duty to not only defend the sovereignty, the safety, the security of the American people, but to help. His job is to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. This man has been invited. He's been invited to an American prison now, and he can't turn down the invitation. This man has been indicted. He's a wanted fugitive. Well, obviously, the FBI couldn't walk into Venezuela and arrest him. They needed the backing of the American military in order to do it. People who say, the president can't do this without a declaration of war. Folks, this is not a war. This was a police action to apprehend a criminal who's been acting in tremendous ways to the detriment of the American people and our way of life. I say, thank God I have not had a relative who has died of fentanyl overdose, but I tell you what, I've met people who have. This is devastating to so many Americans. And Maduro's, again, he's one of the facilitators of it. I mean, for all practical purposes, Maduro's is a cartel leader. And we've declared that these cartels are terrorists, and they're terrorist organizations. So in my view, the president was on strong constitutional grounds as president of the United States and on strong legal grounds in helping to effect an arrest that really should have happened 5 years ago. My goodness. It's taken 5 years and a president who cares in order to do it. But look, in order to pull this off, This requires a massive amount of intelligence because for them to go in, no military American military people killed, no loss even of equipment. Well, that took a tremendous amount of planning, and that planning requires not only military involvement, but it requires intelligence involvement. And in order to talk about that aspect of it, a dear friend of mine, Clare Lopez, is a 20-year retired veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. And she has been in the middle of these kinds of actions in their planning, their execution. She's been involved in this kind of thing directly. And I wanted to have her come on and talk to us about what it took to pull this off and some of the complaints about, well, you didn't tell Congress what might have happened if the president had informed Congress. So we want to discuss those issues. So, Clare, welcome to Truth and Liberty. Thank you so much, Clare. I know how busy you are. Thank you for taking time to be with us, particularly at a time like this. Um, Clare, give us your assessment of the prep work that went in long before any planes took off and long before any troops were dispatched. A whole lot of pre-planning had to go into something like this to pull this off successfully, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Bishop. So glad to be with you on the program. Thanks for having me. This was indeed an amazing operation. It was called Operation Absolute Resolve. And I think you laid the predicates very well for the legal authorization that allowed President Trump and this administration to execute over the night. Friday night into Saturday night this past weekend to execute what, in fact, was an extradition operation to execute a criminal warrant of arrest for Nicolas Maduro, the dictator in Venezuela. Not, and this is important, he was not the legally elected president head of that country in prior elections, the most recent 2024, he was uh, installed, you might say, illegally against the will, against the votes of the Venezuelan people. So number one, he was not a head of state being kidnapped or something by American forces. He was in fact an indicted wanted criminal head of a foreign terrorist organization called Cartel de los Soles, the cartel of the suns, the narco trafficking cartel that he, Nicolas Maduro, headed, as well as in league with another foreign terrorist organization designated by the Department of State, Tren de Aragua, the prison gang, which Maduro allowed out of his own jails in Venezuela to flood up across our borders and into cities, towns, communities across the United States. So that's first of all the premise. But I think you were also spot on, Bishop, when you were mentioning the U.S. Constitution and the authority that gives President Trump. And you very rightly mentioned Article 2, of course, the one dealing with the executive branch of the United States, that is the president. And in Article 2, Section 2, it names the president as the commander in chief of the American military. So he has the right to order our military to execute military actions without informing Congress. Congress holds the right, the authority to declare war. This was not about a declaration of war.
Right.
And therefore, the president had the authority to order our U.S. military to back up our legal law enforcement agencies, in this case, DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, to, as I said, execute this extradition operation to bring a named wanted criminal to justice. The second part of Article 2 of our Constitution, I would mention, and you did too, is Article 2, Section 3. And in that section, it basically says that the president shall ensure the laws be faithfully executed. And those laws obviously include outstanding indictments from 2020 and then again in 2025 by the Department of Justice, indictments, as you mentioned, for for narco trafficking, for actually being the head, really, of a narcotics operation, Cartel de los Soles, and for other crimes that include sending the criminal gang Tren de Aragua into the United States, illegal aliens flooding our country, and more in those two indictments. Again, 2020, and then the one that was just unsealed this past weekend, but had been drawn up, I think, in December of 2025. So those are the justifications. Before I got to anything else, I thought I would back up what you just said and
Excellent.
lay that
Excellent,
out.
Claire. Now, Claire, let me ask you. This gets a little bit off of the strictly intelligence issue, which I want to get back to. Why did it take 5 years? What do you think was the problem? What was the holdup? Um, was it lack of intelligence? Was it lack of will? I mean, the president got this done effectively, efficiently, with no loss of American life. In fact, as far as we know, no loss of any lives. Why wasn't action taken earlier?
It had to be a lack of will. Obviously, the United States military, the United States, legal authorities have had the capability to bring Maduro to justice long time since, but just chose not to do it. Now, obviously, this operation took a lot of preparation. Yeah,
Mhm.
I would expect months of preparation, including training, the input of intelligence from on the ground inside of Venezuela, for sure. By the way, I don't know if you all know, but I actually served in Venezuela. I was in Caracas back in the early 1990s, before Hugo Chavez ever came to power in the later 1990s. Um,
It was a
but
very
at the
different
time we were
Venezuela,
there,
wasn't it? It was a
pardon?
very different Venezuela, wasn't it?
Well, yes and no. At the time, as I said, early 1990s, a lot of our mission, I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Caracas. A lot of the mission had to do with counter narcotics. And, even with assistance to Venezuelan, official organizations like the Guardia Nacional, they themselves were involved at that time in narcotics trafficking. And again, out of
Ah,
Venezuela, it was more cocaine than fentanyl, some fentanyl too, but overwhelmingly out of Venezuela, it was cocaine. But during the time we were there, this is in early 1992. Hugo Chavez, then I think, colonel in the Venezuelan army, stage two aborted attempted coup d'etats, was thrown in jail, only for a few months, let out, did it again. Second attempt while we were there, put down again, back to jail for a few years, but by 1998, he was running for president.
wow. Well, but the country was it doing better economically, leaving aside for the moment the drug trafficking, because we hear
Yeah,
a lot about the Venezuela before Hugo Chavez took over and what
yeah.
happened after he took over.
Well, first of all, to say Venezuela is a beautiful country full of natural resources. It has beaches, it has mountains, it has lush agricultural land. It borders on the Amazon in Brazil. All of that, including lots of natural resources to include uranium, gold, and of course, oil, natural
Oil.
gas to some extent too. And at the time, PDVSA, that is Petróleos de Venezuela, the Venezuelan oil company, was still functioning. Now, at a time previous, 1970s, 1980s, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest, best run countries, certainly in Latin America, maybe in the world. Largest proven reserves of oil in the world. Difficult oil to extract, it's heavy crude, it's in tar sands, as they say, but nevertheless, reserves enormous, all of that. And so, under the presidency of Carlos Andres Perez, who was president at the time we were there, Venezuela was still functioning. It was deeply corrupt, but the oil company, PDVSA for short, was still functioning. But after Chavez took office in, I think, 1999, then he died of cancer in 2013, and Maduro, a former bus driver, took over until now. During that time, the oil industry was essentially destroyed. Cronies were placed in position without any kind of technical knowledge or know-how, and Venezuela's oil industry was pretty much wrecked. And that's why we heard President Trump the other day talking about how much work it's going to take. The responsibility will go to our American oil companies, Mobil, Exxon, and Chevron, Citgo, to repair. It's going to take an enormous amount of repairs to bring that oil infrastructure back up to a functioning level, but it's there. And at the time before, it was thriving. But under Chavez and then Maduro, the country was wrecked. The economy was destroyed. The people were starving, literally starving. I mean, eating
Well,
out of
Claire, I was
cans.
going to say, because my understanding is that the agricultural industry of Venezuela was also thriving before
Yes,
Hugo Chavez took over. I mean, was that
yes,
your
yes.
experience? I mean, they were just producing food that was feeding lots of people around the world, and he just basically completely dismantled that and
Wrecked it.
put the nation right on the pathway to starvation.
Socialist. This was a socialist, uh, communist, you know, regime over all of these years. And maybe that's a good segue to talk about the alignment during those years, the Chavez years, and then followed by the Maduro years, when the regimes in Venezuela aligned with the adversaries of the United States, in particular, of course, Cuba, also Iran, also China, and also Russia. And if anybody died the other night during the extradition operation to seize Maduro, it was his Cuban bodyguard, who I guess kind of were wiped out. But those countries got a foothold, a base of operations in Venezuela during those years that was explicitly intended as a counter and a threat against the United States, our U.S. national security. It's talked about somewhat. Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, mentioned this in the press conference last Saturday. But that base of operations included, as I said, Iran, which was producing drones at least since 2012 in Venezuela. Drones that, yeah, they could be used for surveillance, but also weaponized, and with the range to reach the United States. There were also Iranian Shahed missiles in Venezuela. Not talked about much. It's in the open source arena, but not mentioned much. But these are other reasons, as well as China's attempted incursion, not just into Venezuela, but other places throughout Latin America.
Right.
But those places, those countries, all adversaries of America, got a foothold in Venezuela during those years. And I think at least as much as this was to end the narco trafficking out of Venezuela, it was also what you might call a forfer, not a twofer, but a forfer that took out this hub of adversary operations in Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and China. and you could add Russia to that too. But the naval presence remains. The United States naval presence remains in the Caribbean. That is to interdict the flow of oil out of Venezuela that would go to Cuba. Maybe Cuba's next. It cannot survive without Venezuelan oil. That oil
Well,
also would go to
Claire,
Iran and to China.
Claire, you've been a student, of course, of foreign policy. I mean, really, foreign policy has been your profession. How do you think this reads from a foreign policy perspective with those adversaries that you mentioned, and to the world that's just witnessed this? I mean, what message are they getting from this?
Well, I would start with Cuba. I'm sure that the Castro regime, now under new leadership, of course, but that communist regime in Cuba has gotten the message. Marco Rubio, again, our Secretary of State, has referenced this in remarks that he's made to the media. I would say Cuba first. Watch Cuba. It cannot survive without that oil coming out of Venezuela. The people there are in as devastated a state as the Venezuelans were. The Iranian regime has gotten the message. The people of Iran have been in the streets, as we know, for the last how many days? They're being killed now. The regime has opened fire on them. Somewhere in the numbers of the teens have been killed so far that we know. But the people have had it. The national currency, the real, has plummeted. It has collapsed. It is 1.4 million reals to $1 right now. People
Wow.
can't afford to buy food. The message has also been heard, I'm sure, loud and clear in China and in Russia. There is another group of countries in Latin America. I would name Nicaragua for sure. Cuba, we've mentioned, and maybe a couple more that likewise have probably gotten the message. The Monroe Doctrine, now being called sometimes by the pundits Donroe Doctrine, or as it's officially mentioned, the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine as outlined in the brand new White House 2025 National Security Strategy.
Well, look, for those who may not be familiar with the Monroe Doctrine, basically, President Monroe said to Europe and to the world, the Western Hemisphere is no longer a playground, and you may not come and colonialize and set up your little fiefdoms here. That's no longer acceptable. And we kind of, I watched China infiltrate Latin America, and I'm thinking, why wasn't the president doing something? Why would former presidents allow China to come and really set up a base here? But President Trump has essentially said no more. And I'll tell you, it's welcome news. I think not only for the United States of America, but for our entire hemisphere, and maybe for the world, if they really know what China's up to. I don't know whether we're going to have a chance, Claire, to talk about China, but we're going to get ready to take a break here in a few moments. And after we come back, I want to talk a little bit about intelligence gathering. You alluded to it. You said, we had to be gathering intelligence on the ground in Venezuela. So that means we had some people who were cooperating with us. Maybe we had some of our own people there in Venezuela. And I realize even now you can't talk about means and methods, but I want you to talk about that when we come back. This is Bishop E.W. Jackson. This is Truth and Liberty. Back in a moment.
Most conservative voters want to make a difference, but don't know where to start. There's too much information and not enough direction. That's where the Truth and Liberty Resource Center comes in. It's your one-stop shop for biblical action, with a searchable library of tools, training, and expert insights to help you influence culture with truth. From voter guides to news articles, every resource is hand-selected to equip you for impact. Find your tools, fight for truth.
This is E.W. Jackson, and you're watching Truth and Liberty. I'm in for Richard Harris, and thank you all for joining us. If you've been with us for this program, you've heard information that you probably haven't heard anywhere else, because we have an expert who actually spent time in Venezuela. Clare Lopez is a former CIA agent, 20-year veteran, spent time in Venezuela, speaks fluent Spanish, by the way. and really has a wealth of knowledge and information and expertise about the not only the intelligence gathering, but an understanding of the foreign policy implications of what is happening right now. So, Claire, again, thanks for joining us. Uh, Claire, you ended this last segment talking about the message that went out and is going out really to our adversaries that were kind of using Venezuela as a staging place, with Cuba and China and Iran, um, and that seems to have come to an end. Do you think that that played a major role in this action that President Trump took? Certainly, they're aware of the implications, but you think that played a major role, realizing, and they were killing two birds with one stone, so to speak.
Yeah, I do think it had to have played into their calculations. As I said before, perhaps we could call this a forfer in the takedown of the Maduro regime, but also with very, and I think rather imminent implications for Cuba, for Iran, and for China. The one that I neglected to mention was Hezbollah, and that, of course, the Lebanese Shiite Islamic terror proxy of the regime in Tehran, has had an extensive presence and activities throughout Latin America since the early 1980s when it was formed, Hezbollah in Lebanon, but formed, especially with Venezuela, a close relationship, of
Ah,
course, in tandem with Iran. And in particular, I would say, beginning mm, especially with the presidency of the Iranian president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad back in 2008. He was president of Iran until 2013, and formed during those exact same years the overlap with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. And that relationship had to do with narco trafficking for sure. It also had to do with Iran and Hezbollah using Venezuela as a way to evade financial sanctions imposed by the international community and certainly by the United States, and money laundering through Venezuela. But Hezbollah, of course, also, as we know, very closely aligned with China. Yes, probably in Venezuela, but even more so, I might say, in Mexico, where Hezbollah works with the Mexican drug cartels, Sinaloa in particular, others, Jalisco, Nueva Generacion too. And the relationship with China has to do with the drugs. China, after Trump kind of laid down the law to Xi Jinping at one point, China said, okay, we won't export fentanyl anymore to Mexico. But what did they do? They're exporting the precursor chemicals to Mexico, where
ah,
the drug cartels mix them up. China also provided the pill presses to press out the tablets, the pills, and Hezbollah is deeply involved with all of that. So it's not only in Venezuela, but I should mention Hezbollah. Of course, we know that Hezbollah was the Islamic terror group that carried out the bombings back in 1992, the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and then in 1994, again Buenos Aires, this time the Jewish Cultural Center, short the acronym AMIA, AMIA. So
so
again, yes, all of those players are feeling the impact now of what President Trump has done.
Claire, what you describe is really a cauldron of evil and wickedness that probably most Americans aren't aware of just how deep this thing has gone. And Trump has now moved in and taken care of this, at least begun the process of giving Venezuelans, the Venezuelan people, an opportunity to live in freedom. But look, I want to get back to this because now this enhances the question even more. Given all the players, how in the world do you gather the intelligence that I heard described by one person who was tangentially involved, who said, "Look, we knew where Maduro was sleeping. We knew the color of his pajamas. We basically, when we moved in, we had a vast amount of knowledge and information of his situation, his behavior, the people around him. How do you get all of that, Claire? You've got to be putting people's lives in danger just to be gathering that information, because it takes people on the ground, obviously, who have in some way infiltrated his organization, infiltrated Venezuela. So, talk a little bit about that as someone who has direct knowledge of this kind of stuff.
Well, without delving into anything, related to sources and methods, you're
Right.
absolutely right, Bishop, that the preparation for this operation took many months and involved many people on the ground, both American intelligence officers as well as those Venezuelans who realized, that the Maduro regime was inimical to the interests of the Venezuelan people. Yes, to the American people, obviously, but to the Venezuelan people, and that probably played a large role in the motivation of whichever Venezuelans, agreed to help provide information that led to this remarkable operation, absolutely strategic, absolutely flawlessly carried out, but immensely complicated. If we all, listen to that press conference
Oh
this
my
past
goodness.
weekend again, especially the part where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Cade,
Yes.
described, how the operation went down with so many moving parts. But all of that very much dependent, yes, on long preparation, infiltration of Maduro's inner circle, obviously, and the willingness, and have to say, uh, with great admiration, for those Venezuelans who understood that it was in their people's,
Mhm.
their country's interest that this regime, this illegitimate regime, be replaced by one chosen by the will of the Venezuelan people.
Claire, somebody commended the CIA director, and when they mentioned it and mentioned his name, I thought, I'd forgotten who the guy was. They said, because he's not interested in doing interviews, he's not interested in being on television. He is interested in pursuing the interests of the United States of America under President Trump's leadership, and that's it. And I thought, what a refreshing change from a John Brennan, and some of these other characters who seem to be all caught up in the politics of the Democrat Party, and using the government to punish their enemies. It sounds to me like we've got a CIA that now, with leadership at least, that is now on track to do the job that it's really supposed to be doing. What do
Yeah,
you think?
absolutely. I mean, you're talking about John Ratcliffe, of course, who formerly was a representative from Texas in the House of Representatives in Congress. But it's the entire team, that President Trump has brought in across the top. And, obviously, Kash Patel is the new director of the FBI, played a big role in this. The DEA officials also, too. Love the perp walk photographs of Maduro being walked in handcuffs down the hallway with the director of DEA on one side and I guess I forget who FBI was, it Cash Patel on the other side. But in any case, it's absolutely that new leadership at the top that President Trump has brought in on his team, to which great credit has to go.
So, Claire, what do you think is a timetable? Because the president has said, and this has got a lot of people up in arms. Oh, well, we're going to run it, and until we can transition this back to the Venezuelan people. I mean, as someone, again, you lived in Venezuela, you worked there. What do you think is going to be a reasonable amount of time for the American people to expect this thing to kind of get back on track, and for Venezuela at least to start to we know it's not going to be a year before Venezuela is back to where it used to be, at least. But how much time should we expect before Venezuela is at least on track to come back to being a nation that is free, maybe not no longer dominated by narco terrorists, that kind of thing? And how much involvement by this administration do you think it's going to take to do that?
Well, as we heard President Trump say in that news conference again this past weekend, that it would be a U.S. team headed, of course, by himself, President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, um, and certainly Department of War Secretary Pete Hegseth, and others. But this isn't going to be quick or easy because an awful lot of the Maduro regime remains in Venezuela. And also the foreign presence. We mentioned the Cuban bodyguards. Okay, they've been sent off. Uh, but there are other Cubans. I've heard numbers ranging from 10 to 15,000
Mm.
Cuban intelligence and security officers inside of Venezuela. As well, the whole apparatus that Maduro set up. Right now, as of this past Saturday, his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez is her name, took the oath of office to be the interim president. Um, but how long that interim will last, it's going to be at least many weeks. But again, I want to say that the presence of regime loyalists, Maduro loyalists, in particular, uh, those who staff up the what they call colectivos. Colectivos are sort of local level militias, led, organized by Cubans. Again, that 10 to 15,000 Cuban intelligence and security officials in the country, as well as Iranian officials, Hezbollah. One of the things that Venezuela was doing is using the sort of physical similarity of some Hezbollah, Middle Eastern Lebanese officials or operatives to an Hispanic appearance, right? Uh, Training them up with Spanish language skills and then sending them out to whatever, including up across our border. They're still there. Hezbollah is still there. The Iranian officials are still there. I'm not sure about the Chinese. You probably saw the photos of that delegation that was literally in meetings this past Saturday, practically at the time or just before, I guess, maybe it was Friday, just before the operation went down. They may have taken the first plane load out. I'm not sure about that, but certainly the Chinese influence will now wane in Venezuela. But I'm even more concerned about the Cubans, the Iranians, and Hezbollah. Uh, it's going to take a lot of effort to ensure that the country does not descend into utter chaos in this interim period, and at the same time, that Maduro and regime loyalists, as well as these foreign, adversary officials, are identified and removed from the country.
Well, Claire, it's a tall order, but I'll tell you, I really do believe that we have a president who is equal to the task, because many others wouldn't even have dared to tackle this, and he has.
Mhm.
Look, we're running out of time. Before I let you go, let's bring this back to domestic policy. We've got a new mayor of New York, who is an openly declared socialist. And by the way, he's against the action taken against Maduro, and of course that whole cabal of socialists and Islamists and whatever you want to call it. He would fit right in. Uh, What lessons do you think maybe the American people will learn when they begin to again see how Venezuela went from being a thriving country, imperfect, yes, but nevertheless a thriving country, and then under socialism, watched it literally degenerate into an abysmal, poor, starving nation that was doing nothing really but rewarding the thugs at the top who were getting rich while they watched the Venezuelan people get poor. What do you think is a lesson maybe that people even in New York even who apparently voted for Mamdani will learn from this and maybe learn about socialism and why it's important that it not be allowed to take root in America?
Well, I'm afraid that those New Yorkers who voted for Mamdani are going to have to learn the hard way. Mamdani is not a socialist. He's a communist. He has
Mhm.
spoken out in favor of the government seizure of the means of production. That is straight out of the Communist Manifesto. He has talked about um, uh, the redistribution of wealth by means of confiscatory taxation of the rich. How's that going to go when those with the means are going to flee the city? They're already fleeing the city. Then the government control of things like grocery stores, food. We saw very well, as you just said, Bishop, how that went in Venezuela when we were there way back when. Grocery stores were pretty well stocked. Um, Within the past few years, literally millions of Venezuelans have fled the country because there was no food. There was no food production. They were literally eating out of garbage cans. That is what awaits New York right now. But the other part of that, the flip side of his communist identity for Mamdani, is his Islamic Shiite Twelver identity. Now, what that means is he is a Shiite Muslim. His parents come from India, although he was born when after they had moved to Uganda in Africa, and then the family came to the United States. Um, but he openly on what was then Twitter back in 2019 openly declared himself Ithna Ashara. Ithna Ashara is Arabic for the number 12. What does 12 refer to? It refers to the Shiites' 12th Imam, supposedly after Muhammad, down a line of father, son, imams followed one after the other until the 800s, the ninth century. And in the 800s, the 12th Imam was a little boy. And alternatively, he either fell down a well and drowned, or maybe he was hidden away by his own family for fear that he would be assassinated, because that's what they were doing to each other. But in any case, he had no heirs. There was never going to be a 13th Imam. What to do? And so, because all of Islam awaits, as they say, the return of the Mahdi, their messianic figure,
Right.
Sunnis just think it's a descendant of Muhammad, not particularly identified. But the Shiites, they decided, the Mahdi is the 12th Imam. He's not really dead. He's down the well someplace. He's in occultation, as they say, in hiding. And he will return at the end of time and usher in the day of judgment. Now, okay, fine, but here's the kicker. The regime in Iran right now is comprised of 12ers, believers in the 12th Imam. So does Zohran Mamdani. But here's the kicker. The belief in that 12th Imam says they think they can hasten his return to earth. They can bring him back sooner than he otherwise might have come by instigating Armageddon on earth. Literally, enough war and strife and conflict on earth that he'll feel compelled to come back and set it all straight. Okay, this is the belief of the new mayor
Wow.
of New York City, as well as of the regime in Iran, driving for a nuclear weapons capability. And this is in the city of New York, hit on 9/11, of course, also the Pentagon, Washington, well, Virginia, and the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. But the towers in New York hit on 9/11 by what? An Iranian organized, executed plot. That was an Iranian plot, regime plot, working with Al Qaeda, with Hezbollah. And I know this because I was an expert witness in a legal case called Havlish versus bin Laden et al. And the judge in the case, Judge George Daniel, Southern District of New York, ruled at the end of the case in December of 2011 that Iran and Hezbollah were co-responsible with Al Qaeda for the attacks of 9/11. This is in that city. They've just elected a 12er Islamic jihadi.
Wow, Claire, it is really chilling. In other words, he would look to turn New York into Venezuela if he could. And again, they're always pointing the finger at President Trump, who I know loves this country and honors our Constitution. But these people, in my view, do neither. So, Claire, what can I say? I mean, this has been so very, very informative. Keep up the great work and the great commenting. I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to have you on again, because I know we've only touched the very tip of the iceberg here in discussing this. So, Clare Lopez, thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for joining me today. And look, you and I will be talking again soon.
Thank you very much, Bishop. Glad to be with you today.
All right. Thank you, Claire. Folks, if you listened and caught all of that, I know you must be shaking your head. How such evil allows itself, or no, how it is allowed, doesn't allow itself, how it is allowed to grow and to fester and to take over countries and to infiltrate. I mean, Maduro was not only destroying Venezuela, he was trying to destroy America, trying to destroy it by sending us people who could erode the country from within. So as we wrap up the time we have, I want to say this to all the people who are out there protesting against President Trump's action in Venezuela, and protesting against President Trump, and protesting against America, and protesting against quote unquote imperialism. To all of these people out there, I want to say, we're praying that you get a revelation, because if we follow your vision, we would end up with an America that looks like Venezuela looks right now, in which people are starving, in which there are no jobs, in which the only people benefiting are the people who are at the very top, and that they're using all the power of the government, all the power of their arms, all of the power of their influence to benefit only themselves and leave everybody else in a chaotic dog-eat-dog situation. I don't know whether you heard this, but I trust you did. It was played over and over again, at least in some venues. Zohan Mamdani actually had the unmitigated gall to say, we must reject the frigidity of rugged individualism for the warmth of collectivism. The frigidity, in other words, it's cold. Rugged individualism is cold and unfeeling for the warmth of collectivism. You know, that to me is demonic, because there's nothing warm about collectivism. Collectivism seeks to impose upon people the will of those in power. They call it the collective, but actually it's those people who've got the power imposing upon others their will. And the people who hate our country, although they're free to be out expressing themselves, like all the people who were protesting against President Trump saying, he's taking away our freedom of speech. But here you are on a public platform giving a speech about your freedom of speech being taken away. Duh. Doesn't there seem to be something of a contradiction in terms there? You were out holding massive protests. You were being protected by the police. No one is stopping you. And you're saying, but our right to freedom of speech is being taken away. The reality is that the people who have most lost and seen their rights eroded are Bible-believing Christians who have lost their jobs, lost platforms that they have tried to speak up on because they dare speak from a biblical perspective and they dare proclaim a biblical worldview. Those of us who love this country love it because we know that that right to speak, that right to freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, is a God-given right. And we are the only nation in the world that acknowledges that in our founding documents. The only one. We love this country because we know it's a gift from God. We don't love it because we think it's perfect. We know better than that. America's no more perfect than I am. I'm not perfect. So America can't be perfect. If it were perfect, once I arrive, it wouldn't be anymore. The old joke, If you find a perfect church, don't join it because once you join it, it won't be perfect anymore, But there's no greater nation on earth for fulfilling one's God-given potential to go to the highest place your gifts and abilities will take you through your own initiative, your own hard work, your own willingness to sacrifice, your own willingness to do what needs to be done in order to advance whatever you believe God has put in your heart to get done. This is worth preserving, folks, and it's worth defending against a Nicolas Maduro's who would infiltrate it, against a Zoan Mandami who would bring it down, against an Ilhan Omar who would try to transform it into Somalia. Just go right down the line. All those people who want to fundamentally transform the United States of America are wrong. We love them, we pray for them, but they are wrong. And we will oppose them with the weapons of our warfare, which are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Well, folks, that's going to do it for today's edition of Truth and Liberty. In the meantime, you know what to do. Stand up, step up, speak up, refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side.